John Deere has triggered an economic catastrophe with a sudden move aimed at slashing costs and boosting profits. By shuttering U.S. factories, laying off American workers, and relocating manufacturing operations to Mexico, they have dealt a devastating blow to the $34.5 billion American farming industry. This decision has raised critical questions. How did one company's actions lead to the downfall of American agriculture? Why did Trump's retaliatory measures fail so spectacularly? And is this the moment when American farming loses its global dominance forever? For nearly 2 centuries, John Deere had been synonymous with American agriculture, but everything changed when they blindsided their own supporters with this decision. Trump's response was not merely political, it was deeply personal. Viewing John Deere's move as a betrayal of his core constituents, farmers, factory workers, and rural voters who had staunchly supported him, he retaliated with a harsh 200% tariff on all John Deere equipment manufactured outside the U.S. While this move resonated with his base, it sent shockwaves through financial markets and corporate circles alike. However, Trump's strategy carried significant risks. The tariffs not only targeted John Deere, but also drove up equipment costs for farmers nationwide, sparking unexpected backlash. The very demographic Trump sought to protect, farmers and rural voters, turned against John Deere in unprecedented ways. This marked the beginning of a chaotic period where corporate decisions led to widespread economic fallout. Before delving deeper into how this corporate decision unraveled into a full-blown crisis, remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Farmers' revolt. The fallout was profound. Farmers, long loyal to John Deere for its reliability and American-made heritage, felt betrayed. This wasn't just about losing a trusted brand. It felt like a personal affront. In coffee shops and county fairs across America, the outrage brewed as farmers lamented the loss of a company they once considered family. The anger wasn't solely about job losses, but also about John Deere's restrictive policies on equipment. Repairs. For years, farmers had struggled with the company's proprietary software and high repair costs, feeling powerless against its monopolistic grip on their livelihoods. The decision to outsource production to Mexico became the last straw. In response, farmers mobilized. They protested, boycotted online, and shifted their allegiance to competitors like Kubota, Casey, and AGCO, companies known for more repair-friendly policies and local manufacturing. Across the Midwest, John Deere logos that once adorned barns were painted over, and dealerships that relied on John Deere sales for generations faced sharp declines in business. This shift wasn't just symbolic, it became a form of economic warfare. John Deere severely miscalculated how fast their most devoted supporters could turn into their strongest opponents, and the backlash wasn't just from farmers. The very workers who built John Deere's machines were about to enter the fight. The labor collapse. John Deere's longtime factory workers, many of whom had spent decades assembling tractors, harvesters, and combines, were blindsided by the news that their jobs were being relocated to Mexico. For these communities in Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin, John Deere wasn't just a job, it was a way of life. The layoffs weren't just economic, they felt like a betrayal of legacy, identity, and family history. Entire towns depended on those paychecks, and when the shutdowns hit, so did a wave of outrage. Protests erupted. Workers accused John Deere of abandoning American labor while padding executive bonuses and raking in record profits. National labor unions, including the United Auto Workers, quickly mobilized, launching strikes and calling for federal intervention. Picket lines formed outside shuttered plants with signs like "Deere sold us out" and "Bring our jobs home." But John Deere held firm, claiming the outsourcing was essential to stay globally competitive. Machinery crisis and tariff fallout. As this labor unrest intensified, it triggered a domino effect that would destabilize the broader farming economy. John Deere's outsourcing, coupled with Trump's retaliatory 200% tariffs on foreign-made equipment, sent farming machinery prices into a tailspin. These machines, tractors, harvesters, combines, are the backbone of modern farming, not optional luxuries. What once cost $60,000 was now priced well over $100,000. And that was just the beginning. Trump's tariffs, intended to punish John Deere, ultimately punished the very farmers they were meant to protect. Manufacturing costs surged, and John Deere did what corporations do. They passed those costs directly onto the consumer. Repair costs skyrocketed too, as farmers were hit with both inflation and new logistical bottlenecks from parts now needing to be imported across borders. Supply chains became snarled. Customs delays, rising fuel costs, and international shipping hurdles added even more strain. Every delayed delivery meant more downtime for farmers and more financial losses. The small farmer squeeze. Small, independent farmers were hit hardest. A generation ago, they could finance new equipment and pay it off over several harvests. But with rising interest rates and tighter lending practices, that option vanished. Many farmers turned to the used market just to stay afloat, but soaring demand made even decades-old machines unaffordable. Prices for used equipment ballooned, and many found themselves paying more for outdated machinery than they once did for brand-new models. Breaking point. This exposed a critical vulnerability. Not only were farmers struggling to afford the tools they needed, but they were also about to lose the labor force required to keep those tools running. The next crisis, an immigration meltdown, was about to further destabilize American agriculture, threatening to wipe out the very foundation of the country's farming system. This cascade of corporate decisions, political retaliation, and systemic failure didn't just hurt one company, it fractured the entire ecosystem of American farming. John Deere's leadership underestimated how quickly their most loyal customers could become their fiercest enemies. And the revolt wasn't limited to farmers alone, because the workers who built those machines were about to join the fight. The labor collapse. John Deere's loyal workforce declared war on the company they once trusted. The factory workers who had spent their lives assembling tractors, combines, and harvesters were blindsided when they learned their jobs were being shipped to Mexico. Many had worked at John Deere plants for decades. For them, the company wasn't just an employer, it was a way of life. Entire towns in Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin revolved around John Deere factories. Generations of families depended on those paychecks. So when the closures were announced, the anger exploded into protests and walkouts. But it wasn't just about job loss. Workers accused John Deere of turning its back on American labor while raking in billions in profits. They pointed to skyrocketing corporate bonuses and executive raises while factories were shuttered and communities devastated. Unions mobilized fast. The United Auto Workers and other labor organizations launched strikes, demanding that Deere reverse its decision. They called on the government to intervene, accusing the company of corporate greed at the expense of American livelihoods. The protests gained national attention. News outlets broadcast images of angry workers picketing outside empty factories. Their signs read, "Deere sold us out and bring our jobs home." But John Deere refused to back down. Executives stood by the plan, arguing outsourcing was necessary to stay competitive in a global market. The equipment price explosion. As the labor war escalated, a chain reaction was already underway, one that would shake the entire American farming industry to its core. When tractors became unaffordable, farming equipment prices didn't just rise, they exploded. Tractors, combines, harvesters, these weren't luxuries, they were lifelines. But after Deere's outsourcing and Trump's retaliatory tariffs, prices skyrocketed. A $60,000 tractor suddenly cost more than $100,000, and that was just the beginning. In an attempt to punish John Deere for outsourcing, Trump imposed a 200% tariff on John Deere equipment manufactured outside the U.S. But the reality was different. The tariffs punished American farmers. Deere's response was predictable. Pass every added cost straight onto the customer. Now, buying, maintaining, or even repairing a tractor cost twice as much. On top of that, Deere's move to shift production overseas created logistical nightmares. Parts that once came from within the country now had to cross borders, go through customs, and navigate a broken global supply chain. Fuel prices, shipping delays, and unavailable parts drove costs even higher. Small farmers felt the pain first. A generation ago, they could finance new equipment and pay it off over several harvests. But now, with interest rates soaring and bank loans harder to get, they couldn't afford even used machinery. As demand surged, used equipment prices soared too. Farmers were paying premium prices for machines that were decades old. And just as farmers struggled to afford the machines, they were about to lose the workers they needed to operate them. The immigration meltdown that destroyed American farms. While headlines focused on Trump's war with Deere and rising prices, another crisis was unfolding, quietly but devastatingly, across rural America. Farmers weren't just losing machines, they were losing people. For decades, American agriculture had relied heavily on immigrant labor, especially undocumented workers. These workers were the invisible backbone of the food supply chain, performing brutal, thankless labor that most American citizens refused to do. From sunrise to sunset, they planted, tended, and harvested crops, often for low wages and zero job security. But Trump's immigration crackdown changed everything. Sweeping raids, mass deportations, and harsh border policies led to a dramatic collapse in farm labor availability. By 2018, the Department of Agriculture estimated that 70% of U.S. farm workers were foreign-born, and many undocumented. When those workers disappeared, so did the crops. farmers in California, Arizona, and Florida publicly admitted they couldn't find enough people to pick their produce. Entire harvests were lost. Fields of ripe strawberries, lettuce, and tomatoes were left to rot. Millions of dollars of food was plowed under. The few workers who remained demanded higher wages, but many farmers simply couldn't pay. Already squeezed by equipment prices and falling crop values, they faced an impossible choice: pay more for labor and go bankrupt, or lose their harvest and still go bankrupt. The crop price collapse that bankrupted rural America. The final blow came not from factories or politics, but from the market. In 2022, global overproduction of corn, soybeans, and wheat flooded the system. Brazil, Argentina, and India expanded output dramatically, driving down prices worldwide. Corn prices fell 37%, soybeans dropped 24%, wheat plummeted 35%. For American farmers barely holding on, this was the nail in the coffin. When crop prices fall, farmers have two options: produce more to compensate or scale back and hope for a recovery. But both paths were deadly. Producing more required more equipment, more fuel, and more fertilizer, all now unaffordable. Scaling back meant losing efficiency and getting steamrolled by massive agribusinesses. The result was a wave of farm closures not seen since the Great Depression. Small, family-owned farms, some passed down for generations, were sold to corporate giants or foreign investors. Local economies crumbled, schools closed, shops shuttered, main streets became ghost towns. This wasn't just economic, it was cultural. Farming wasn't just a job, it was a way of life, and that life was being erased by forces far beyond any farmer's control. The automation gamble that backfired on Deere and on America. As the storm raged, John Deere unveiled its solution: automation. The company poured billions into autonomous tractors, robotic harvesters, and AI-powered precision farming systems. Deere executives promised this would be farming's salvation. 24-hour machines, drone-monitored fields, AI-guided planting. But for most farmers, this wasn't a lifeline. It was a lockout. A self-driving tractor could cost $500,000 or more. Precision farming tools came with expensive subscriptions, constant maintenance, and steep learning curves. Only massive corporate farms could afford the leap. Small and mid-size farms, already crushed by labor shortages and plummeting crop prices, were left behind. Deere's automation push widened the gap between Big Ag and the rest of rural America. Worse still, automation eliminated what little rural labor remained. Robots replaced jobs. Communities that once thrived on agricultural employment fell deeper into decay. John Deere had promised to save farming. Instead, it accelerated the collapse of the very communities that built its empire. The death of the American family farm. But the real damage was only beginning, because as America's farming system crumbled, powerful forces from outside the country were preparing to take its place. The American family farm isn't dying, it's being erased. For generations, rural America was built on small family-owned farms. They were sacred, passed down from parents to children. But today, those farms are vanishing. Not because farmers gave up, but because they were systematically pushed out. Over the past 4 decades, the U.S. has lost more than 50% of its small farms. The countryside that once held a patchwork of independent growers is now dominated by massive agribusiness, corporations that control the land and the market. This didn't happen by accident. It was fueled by soaring operational costs, falling crop prices, tightening labor markets, automation barriers, and government policies that favored large-scale production over local resilience. The result is a rural America that looks less like a community and more like a commodity. The numbers are staggering. In 1978, the U.S. was home to over 685,000 small farms. Today, fewer than 325,000 remain. More than 350,000 family farms have vanished. Their land has been sold, their barns abandoned, and countless families have been forced to leave behind a way of life that once shaped the American identity for generations. There are many reasons behind this decline. Soaring equipment costs, driven partly by John Deere's aggressive pricing and restrictive repair policies, have made it nearly impossible for small farmers to stay afloat. Meanwhile, falling crop prices caused by global overproduction and international trade conflicts have slashed their income. On top of that, stricter lending standards have made it harder for these farmers to get the credit they need to survive. A major blow has also come from generational decline. Many young people raised on farms are choosing not to return. Faced with the long hours, financial hardship, and heavy debt burden that define their parents' lives, they seek different futures in cities or other industries. As older generations retire or pass on, there's often no one left to take over. In their place, massive corporate-run farms with thousands of acres and tightly integrated operations have taken over. These agribusiness giants have no interest in preserving rural traditions or communities. They're focused solely on profit and efficiency, regardless of the toll on small farmers. That toll has been immense. As family farms vanish, entire rural towns have crumbled. Local diners, equipment shops, feed stores, and schools have shut down. The very fabric of rural American life has unraveled, leaving behind ghost towns and abandoned farmland. And just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, nature delivered the final blow. It wasn't just economic pressure or corporate consolidation that destroyed American farming. It was climate change. Farmers, long accustomed to battling market forces, now face a threat that's even more devastating: the climate. In recent years, extreme weather events have battered American farms. Historic droughts have turned fertile ground to dust. Torrential floods have wiped out whole harvests. Wildfires have scorched fields, destroyed equipment, and displaced entire families. Since 2015, drought in the Midwest has increased by over 40%. In 2019, flooding in the Mississippi River Basin caused more than $20 billion in crop losses. And, since 2018, wildfires in California have burned over 4 million acres of farmland. These disasters aren't isolated. They're part of a growing trend of climate-driven chaos. Rising global temperatures are changing rainfall patterns, lengthening droughts, and making storms more intense. For farmers who rely on predictable weather, this is catastrophic. The financial toll is crushing. Insurance payouts for crop losses have soared, but they can't fully make up for what's lost. Lifelong farmers are seeing their businesses fall apart in a matter of days, and the damage doesn't stop at the farm. Failed harvests lead to higher food prices, broken supply chains, and crumbling rural economies. Consumers across America feel the pain every time they buy groceries. Climate change has also made future planning nearly impossible. Traditional growing calendars no longer apply. Pest populations are exploding due to milder winters. Water shortages are becoming permanent. In once lush areas, farmers are drowning not just in debt, but in uncertainty. At the same time, the political storm surrounding American agriculture is intensifying. What began as a show of strength has turned into a disaster. Former President Trump's trade war, once framed as a crackdown on outsourcing and corporate betrayal, is now backfiring. His threat of 200% tariffs against John Deere marked the beginning of a political debacle that has shaken the farming sector even further. The numbers are staggering. In 1978, there were over 685,000 small farms in the U.S. Today, fewer than 325,000 remain. That means more than 350,000 family farms have vanished, their land sold, barns abandoned, and families forced to leave behind a way of life that helped define America for centuries. This collapse stems from many factors. Equipment costs have skyrocketed, driven partly by John Deere's pricing and restrictive repair policies, making it nearly impossible for small farms to stay afloat. At the same time, global overproduction and trade wars have caused crop prices to plummet. Tighter lending standards have made credit harder to obtain, and generational decline is taking its toll. Many young people raised on farms are walking away, deterred by the crushing debt, long hours, and financial instability. As older generations age out, no one is left to continue the legacy. Taking their place are massive corporate farms, sprawling, vertically integrated operations focused solely on efficiency and profit. These agri-giants have no interest in preserving rural traditions or communities. The damage has been immense. Entire towns have withered. Diners, equipment dealers, feed stores, even schools have shut down. Rural America's social fabric is unraveling, leaving behind empty fields and boarded-up main streets. And just as things couldn't seem worse, nature delivered the final blow. Climate change has devastated American farming. While farmers have long struggled with volatile markets and corporate pressures, they now face something even more destructive: the weather. Droughts have turned fertile land into dust. Floods have wiped out entire seasons. Wildfires have destroyed crops and homes. Since 2015, drought conditions in the Midwest have surged by over 40%. In 2019, floods in the Mississippi River Basin caused $20 billion in crop losses. In California, over 4 million acres of farmland have burned since 2018. These aren't isolated incidents, they're part of a worsening pattern of extreme weather fueled by climate change. Rising temperatures have disrupted rainfall, extended droughts, and intensified storms, crippling farmers who rely on stability. Insurance can't make up for the destruction. Decades of work are vanishing overnight. Crop failures raise food prices, break supply chains, and collapse rural economies. Impacts felt nationwide at grocery store checkouts. Planning has become impossible. Growing seasons shift. Pests thrive in warmer winters. Water shortages are now constant in areas that once saw abundant rain. Meanwhile, political instability is pushing agriculture to the edge. What began as Trump's bold stand against corporate outsourcing, including a 200% tariff threat against John Deere, quickly backfired. Intended to protect American jobs, the move instead created panic in rural areas. Equipment prices soared. Markets shrank. Farmers who once supported Trump felt betrayed. Protests broke out. Revenue dropped across dealerships, seed suppliers, and ag banks. The political backlash was swift. Support for Trump plummeted among rural voters. Even Republican lawmakers began distancing themselves from the trade war. This strategy, once seen as strength, became a costly political miscalculation that may have permanently eroded Trump's rural base. But deeper questions remained. Can American agriculture be saved from collapse? The challenges are immense: corporate consolidation, climate disruption, trade wars, and political chaos. Yet there are potential solutions. Policy reform is critical. The federal government must redirect support from corporate agribusiness to small and mid-sized farms, with better access to credit, targeted subsidies for sustainable practices, and rural infrastructure investment. Technology also has a role, but innovation must be accessible and practical, not billion-dollar systems for mega farms. Precision agriculture, regenerative techniques, and climate-resilient crops can help smaller farms survive. Immigration reform is vital too. Without a stable workforce, American agriculture cannot function. A humane and realistic approach is needed. Trade policy must be rethought. Rebuilding global partnerships and forging fair agreements is essential, without destructive tariffs. And consumers matter. Supporting local farmers, demanding transparency, and advocating for rural-focused policies can drive change. Saving American farming won't be easy, but coordinated action from government, business, and individuals can still reverse the trend, building a system that's resilient, fair, and sustainable. Yet time is running out. The world isn't waiting. As the US floundered, Europe moved fast. When John Deere announced its outsourcing plans and the American farm crisis deepened, the EU saw opportunity. Europe acted decisively, launching tariffs on US crops, boosting domestic subsidies by over $27 billion, and promoting European exports to fill the void left by America. They aggressively pursued new trade deals with Africa and the Middle East, offering lower prices and reliability that chaotic US exporters couldn't match. This was more than economics, it was geopolitics. Europe framed itself as the defender of fair trade, while American firms found themselves increasingly unwelcome overseas. Meanwhile, another player was rising: Latin America. Brazil and Argentina stepped into the vacuum with precision. Brazil poured over $10 billion into export infrastructure. Argentine farmers received tax breaks and equipment subsidies. Together, they undercut US prices by 10 to 15%, rapidly capturing market share across Africa, Asia, and Europe. They didn't just sell crops. They challenged US machinery dominance too, offering cheaper alternatives to John Deere's products. Latin America's agricultural rise wasn't an accident. It was the result of years of preparation and a timely response to America's self-inflicted collapse. While Brazil and Argentina rose to prominence in global agriculture, a new powerhouse was quietly reshaping the industry, and it wasn't in the Western Hemisphere. India, often overlooked, was building an agricultural empire of its own. As the US descended into internal turmoil, India, led by the Mahindra Group, seized the moment. While American farmers were drowning in bankruptcies, boycotts, and declining trust in legacy brands like John Deere, Mahindra moved strategically into the gap. India had never been a major player in the global farm equipment arena until Mahindra changed the game. With American agriculture in retreat and equipment prices soaring due to tariffs, Mahindra positioned itself as a cost-effective alternative. The Indian government supported this growth, investing over $4 billion into modernizing agriculture, offering subsidies and incentivizing exports. Mahindra rapidly expanded into regions where John Deere had long held dominance, first Southeast Asia, then Africa, Latin America, and even parts of Europe. Their approach was straightforward: provide tough, easy-to-maintain equipment at prices up to 40% lower than American brands. But Mahindra didn't just sell tractors, it built ecosystems. By partnering with local dealerships and offering tailored financing and service options, the company addressed the needs of small and mid-sized farmers, the very ones priced out by US-made machinery. The results were dramatic. By 2025, Mahindra had overtaken John Deere to become the world's leading tractor manufacturer by volume. More significantly, Mahindra earned something Deere lost: trust. Across developing nations, Mahindra became the brand that truly understood farmers, while American machines came to symbolize high costs, political instability, and economic uncertainty. India's agricultural rise wasn't limited to machinery. Leveraging its new global status, India negotiated fresh trade agreements that pushed US exports further to the margins. It became a key player in both food production and equipment sales, offering an integrated, affordable solution that broke the American monopoly on agricultural power. But Mahindra's success marked more than just a business win. It signaled a seismic shift in global farming. The collapse of John Deere effectively redrew the agricultural map. What started with layoffs and plant closures in the US Midwest spiraled into a worldwide reordering of agricultural influence. For over 100 years, America's farmers and companies like Deere ruled the food supply chain. In under a decade, that dominance unraveled. Europe protected its farmers with aggressive subsidies and trade strategies. Latin America flooded markets with inexpensive, high-quality produce and equipment. India, with Mahindra at its core, built a global agricultural network. Even China, long a looming threat, was no longer the only contender challenging US supremacy. The fall of John Deere echoed beyond just machinery. America's voice in shaping international agricultural policy faded. Nations that once relied on US exports found new partners in Brazil, India, and the EU. American farmers, once the heart of rural strength and pride, were now sidelined in a global market where they were no longer preferred. The impact was brutal. By 2027, US agricultural exports had dropped by 30%. Rural towns collapsed, family farms vanished. John Deere, once iconic, became irrelevant in many regions. But perhaps the deepest wound was psychological: the loss of a national belief that America would always feed the world. That confidence is now gone. The fall of John Deere and the broader collapse of US agriculture didn't just reshape global trade, it shattered America's economic identity. And there you have it, how one corporation's unraveling helped bring down a $34.5 billion industry. But now it's your turn. Can American farming bounce back, or has the damage already been done? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into the forces behind America's economic downfall, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.